The galaxy was a vast, unforgiving expanse, and humanity had always been the punchline of its grand cosmic joke. For centuries, the other species of the Galactic Union had looked upon Earth's inhabitants with a mixture of pity and disdain. They called humans soft, fragile, and unfit for the stars. Their warriors, though numerous, were dismissed as little more than children playing at war. The Galactic Council, a governing body of the most powerful species, had long tolerated humanity's presence out of a sense of obligation rather than respect. But now, as the Council announced the first interspecies war games, humanity's place in the universe was about to be tested like never before. The war games were a tradition older than the Union itself, a brutal competition designed to determine the strongest species in the galaxy. Every century, the Council selected a hostile, uninhabited planet as the arena, and the most elite warriors from each species were sent to fight for supremacy. The rules were simple: survive, outlast, and dominate. The last species standing would earn not only glory but also a seat at the highest echelons of galactic power. For humanity, this was an opportunity to prove their worth, or to be humiliated on the grandest stage imaginable. The announcement came during a routine council session, broadcast across the galaxy. The holographic image of Counselor Vrax, a towering reptilian with scales that shimmered like molten gold, filled the screens of every human settlement. "The war games will commence in 3 cycles, he declared, his voice a deep, resonant growl. "All species are invited to participate. Let the strongest prevail." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and humanity's leaders knew they had no choice but to accept. To decline would be to admit weakness, and weakness was a luxury humanity could no longer afford. Preparations began immediately. Earth's governments, often divided by borders and ideologies, set aside their differences to form a united front. The best soldiers, scientists, and strategists were gathered from every corner of the planet. Among them was Captain Elias Kane, a veteran of countless conflicts and a man who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer. Kane was a legend among human forces, known for his unyielding resolve and tactical brilliance. He had fought in the asteroid skirmishes against the Zorathians and led the defense of the Martian colonies during the Krell invasion. But even he knew this would be his greatest challenge yet. Kane stood in the dimly lit briefing room of the UNSS Resolute, the flagship of humanity's fleet. Around him were the other members of the human team: Lieutenant Aisha Patel, a brilliant engineer with a knack for improvisation; Sergeant Marcus Rook Grayson, a hulking brute of a man with a heart of gold; and Dr. Lin May, a xenobiologist whose knowledge of alien physiology was unmatched. They were an unlikely group, each bringing their own strengths and weaknesses to the table. But together, they represented humanity's best hope. "We're the underdogs," Kane said, his voice steady but laced with determination. "They'll underestimate us. They'll think we're weak, unprepared. But that's our advantage. We're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for every human who's ever been looked down on, every one of us who's been told we don't belong. We're going to show them what humanity is made of." The team trained relentlessly, pushing themselves to their limits. They studied the tactics and weaknesses of their opponents, from the insectoid Krell with their hive mind to the technologically advanced Zorathians. They practiced in simulated environments, learning to adapt to the harsh conditions of the arena planet. And through it all, they forged a bond that went beyond mere camaraderie. They were a family united by a common purpose. The day of the war games arrived, and the human team boarded the Resolute for the journey to the arena. The planet, designated as X-427, was a desolate wasteland of jagged mountains and toxic atmosphere. It was a place where only the strongest could survive, and the other species had already begun to gather. The sight of the alien armies was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The Krell moved as one, their chitinous armor glinting in the dim light. The Zorathians' sleek, silver ships hovered above the surface, their weapons humming with barely contained energy. And then there were the Vraxians, the reptilian species to which Counselor Vrax belonged. They were the favorites to win, their warriors towering and muscular, their eyes filled with predatory glee. As the human team disembarked, they were met with a chorus of jeers and laughter. The other species had gathered to watch the newcomers, their mockery echoing across the barren landscape. "Look at them," sneered a Vraxian warrior, his voice dripping with contempt. "They're like insects. This will be over before it begins." Kane ignored the taunts, his focus unwavering. He knew that words were meaningless, only actions mattered now. The war games began with a deafening roar as the arena's energy shield activated, trapping all participants within its boundaries. The first wave of attacks came almost immediately. The Krell, true to their nature, swarmed the human position, their numbers overwhelming. But humanity was ready. Patel had rigged a series of EMP devices, disabling the Krell's communication network and throwing them into disarray. Grayson led the counterattack, his massive frame cutting through the enemy like a scythe. And Dr. May provided critical intel, identifying the Krell's weak points and guiding the team's strikes. The battle was fierce, and the human team suffered losses. But they held their ground, their determination unshaken. As the dust settled, the other species began to take notice. The mockery faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Humanity was not as weak as they had thought. By the end of the first day, the human team had secured a foothold in the arena. They were battered and bruised, but they were still standing. As they gathered around a makeshift campfire, Kane looked at his team with pride. "We've made it through the first round," he said. "But this is just the beginning. They'll come at us harder tomorrow. We need to be ready." The team nodded, their resolve stronger than ever. They knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but they also knew they had something the other species lacked: the unbreakable spirit of humanity. As the fire crackled and the stars above burned brightly, they prepared for the battles to come. The war games were far from over, and humanity was just getting started. The second day on X-427 dawned with a crimson sky, the toxic atmosphere swirling like a storm of blood and ash. The human team, battered but unbroken, moved cautiously through the jagged terrain. The initial victory against the Krell had bought them time, but it had also drawn attention. The other species were no longer laughing. They were watching, calculating, and preparing. Captain Elias Kane knew that the real test was about to begin. The team's first objective was to secure a high vantage point, a towering mesa that overlooked the arena's central valley. From there, they could monitor enemy movements and plan their next moves. But the mesa was not unoccupied. The Zorathians, with their advanced technology and cold, calculating minds, had already claimed it. Their silver ships hovered above the plateau, scanning the area with relentless precision. Kane knew that a direct assault would be suicide. Instead, he turned to Lieutenant Aisha Patel. "Can you disable their sensors?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Patel nodded, her fingers already dancing across the interface of her portable computer. "I can create a localized EMP burst. It'll knock out their scanners for a few minutes, but they'll detect the source. We'll have to move fast." Kane turned to the rest of the team. "Rook, you're with me. Dr. May, stay back and keep an eye on our flanks. We're going in quiet." The plan was risky, but it was their best shot. Patel's EMP device was a small, unassuming piece of equipment, but its impact was immediate. As the pulse rippled through the air, the Zorathian ships shuddered, their lights flickering and dimming. Kane and Grayson moved like shadows, scaling the rocky slope with practiced ease. They reached the plateau just as the Zorathians began to recover. The fight was brutal and swift. The Zorathians, though technologically superior, were not prepared for the raw ferocity of humanity's warriors. Kane's combat skills were unmatched, his movements precise and deadly. Grayson, true to his nickname, was a force of nature, his sheer strength overwhelming the enemy. Together, they cleared the plateau, securing the vantage point for their team. But the victory came at a cost. Grayson had taken a hit to his side, the wound bleeding heavily despite the advanced medkit Dr. May applied. "I'll live," he grunted, his voice strained but defiant. "Just don't expect me to carry you, Kane." Kane smirked, but his eyes were serious. "Rest up, Rook. We're not done yet." As the team settled into their new position, they began to notice a shift in the arena. The other species, once dismissive of humanity, were now actively targeting them. The Vraxians, in particular, seemed determined to eliminate the upstart humans. Their scouts had been spotted on the edges of the valley, their movements deliberate and menacing. "They're coming for us," Patel said, her voice tense. "And they're not alone. The Krell are regrouping, and the Zorathians won't stay down for long." Kane nodded, his mind racing. They needed a plan, something bold and unexpected. He turned to Dr. May. "What do we know about the Vraxians' weaknesses?" May hesitated, her brow furrowed in thought. "They're strong, fast, and highly resilient, but they're also arrogant. They rely on their physical superiority and tend to underestimate their opponents. If we can lure them into a trap, we might stand a chance." The idea took shape quickly. The mesa's position gave them a clear view of the valley, and the rocky terrain provided ample opportunities for ambushes. Kane outlined the plan. They would create the illusion of vulnerability, drawing the Vraxians into a narrow canyon where their numbers would be less of an advantage. Patel rigged a series of explosive charges along the canyon walls, while Grayson, despite his injury, prepared to lead the decoy team. The trap was set just as the Vraxians arrived. Their warriors moved with a predatory grace, their scales glinting in the dim light. Grayson and a small group of human soldiers made a show of retreating, drawing the Vraxians deeper into the canyon. The aliens took the bait, their confidence blinding them to the danger. When the charges detonated, the canyon became a death trap. Rocks rained down, crushing Vraxians and cutting off their retreat. Kane and the rest of the team moved in, their weapons blazing. The fight was fierce, the Vraxians' strength and ferocity matched only by humanity's determination. But the trap had worked. The Vraxians, caught off guard and outmaneuvered, were forced to retreat. The victory was a turning point. Word of humanity's success spread quickly through the arena, and the other species began to take them seriously. The mockery and disdain were replaced by a grudging respect. But Kane knew that respect could be just as dangerous as contempt. The other species would now see humanity as a threat, and they would come at them with everything they had. As the team regrouped, Kane took a moment to assess their situation. They had secured a strong position and dealt a significant blow to one of their most formidable opponents. But they were also running low on supplies, and Grayson's injury was a growing concern. They needed to find a way to replenish their resources and prepare for the next wave of attacks. Patel suggested scavenging the wreckage of the Zorathian ships they had disabled earlier. "Their technology is advanced, but I might be able to repurpose some of it," she said. "It could give us an edge." Kane agreed, and a small team was sent to retrieve what they could. The mission was risky, but it paid off. Patel managed to salvage enough components to create a makeshift shield generator, providing the team with much-needed protection. Dr. May, meanwhile, used her knowledge of alien biology to create a potent toxin from the local flora, which could be used to tip their weapons. As night fell, the team gathered around their campfire once more. The mood was somber but determined. They had survived another day, but the cost had been high. Grayson's injury was a reminder of the stakes, and the knowledge that the other species were regrouping weighed heavily on their minds. Kane looked at his team, his expression grim but resolute. "We've come this far," he said. "We've shown them what we're made of, but this isn't over. They'll come at us harder tomorrow, and we need to be ready. We're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for every human who's ever been told they don't belong. We're fighting for our place in this galaxy, and we're not going to back down." The team nodded, their resolve stronger than ever. They knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but they also knew they had something the other species lacked: the unbreakable spirit of humanity. As the fire crackled and the stars above burned brightly, they prepared for the battles to come. The war games were far from over, and humanity was just getting started. The final day on X-427 arrived with a sense of foreboding that hung heavy in the air. The crimson sky had darkened to a deep, bruised purple, and the toxic winds carried the scent of ash and decay. The human team, weary but resolute, knew that this would be the day that decided their fate. The other species, once dismissive and mocking, now saw humanity as a legitimate threat. They would come with everything they had, and the humans would need to be ready. Captain Elias Kane stood at the edge of the mesa, his eyes scanning the valley below. The makeshift shield generator hummed softly behind him, its energy field providing a fragile barrier against the coming storm. Lieutenant Aisha Patel was busy fine-tuning the device, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Sergeant Marcus Rook Grayson, his injury bandaged but still painful, leaned against a rock, his expression grim but determined. Dr. Lin Mei was tending to the team's supplies, her mind already working on strategies to counter the inevitable attacks. "They're coming," Kane said, his voice low but steady. "The Vraxians, the Krell, the Zorathians, they'll hit us hard and fast. We need to be ready for anything." The team nodded, their resolve unshaken. They had come too far to falter now. The battles of the previous days had forged them into a cohesive unit, their strengths complementing each other perfectly. But they also knew that the final assault would be unlike anything they had faced before. The other species would not hold back, and the humans would need to dig deep to survive. The first wave came just as the sun began to rise. The Krell, their numbers replenished, swarmed the base of the mesa like a living tide. Their chitinous armor gleamed in the dim light, and their mandibles clicked with a sound that sent shivers down the spine. Patel's shield generator held firm, its energy field repelling the initial assault. But the Krell were relentless, and it was only a matter of time before they found a weakness. Kane took command, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Rook, hold the left flank. Patel, keep that shield up as long as you can. Dr. May, we need those toxins ready. We're not going down without a fight." The battle was fierce and unrelenting. Grayson, despite his injury, fought like a man possessed, his massive frame cutting through the Krell with brutal efficiency. Patel worked tirelessly to keep the shield generator running, her hands moving frantically over the controls. Dr. May distributed the toxin-tipped weapons, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around her. And Kane, his combat skills honed to perfection, led the defense with a precision that left no room for error. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. Dr. May grabbed a vial of the toxin and a small injector, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. Kane and Grayson formed a protective barrier, their weapons blazing as they fought to clear a path. Patel stayed behind, her focus entirely on the shield generator, her fingers moving with desperate speed. The journey to the nearest Zorathian ship was a nightmare. The Krell swarmed around them, their claws slashing and their mandibles snapping. Grayson took the brunt of the assault, his massive frame absorbing blows that would have felled a lesser man. Kane fought with a precision that bordered on the supernatural, his every movement calculated and deadly. And Dr. May, her heart pounding in her chest, stayed close, her eyes fixed on the target. They reached the ship just as the shield generator finally failed. The energy field collapsed with a deafening roar, and the Krell surged forward, their numbers overwhelming. Grayson turned to face them, his expression one of grim determination. "Go!" he shouted. "I'll hold them off." Grayson grinned, his teeth bared in a fierce smile. "Don't worry about me. Just win this thing." With that, Kane and Dr. May entered the Zorathian ship, their movements swift and silent. The interior was a maze of corridors and chambers, the walls glowing with an eerie, silver light. Dr. May led the way, her knowledge of alien technology guiding them to the ship's central control system. They reached it just as the Zorathians realized they were on board. The fight was brief but intense. Kane's combat skills were more than a match for the Zorathian guards, and Dr. May worked quickly to introduce the toxin into the ship's systems. The effect was immediate. The ship shuddered, its lights flickering and dimming. The energy beams that had been raining down on the mesa ceased, and the Zorathian fleet began to retreat. But the victory came at a cost. As Kane and Dr. May emerged from the ship, they saw Grayson surrounded by Krell, his body battered and broken but still fighting. With a final, defiant roar, he charged into the swarm, his actions buying them the time they needed to escape. The team regrouped at the mesa, their numbers diminished but their resolve unbroken. The Krell, their forces decimated by Grayson's last stand, began to retreat. The Zorathians, their fleet disabled, were no longer a threat. Only the Vraxians remained, their warriors gathering at the edge of the valley for one final assault. Kain knew that this would be the ultimate test. The Vraxians were the strongest, the most resilient, and the most determined. They would not retreat, and they would not surrender. It would be a fight to the death. The battle that followed was the most intense of all. The Vraxians came in waves, their strength and ferocity unmatched. But humanity, driven by the memory of Grayson's sacrifice and the knowledge that they were fighting for their place in the galaxy, fought with a determination that bordered on madness. Kain led the charge, his every movement a testament to his skill and resolve. Patel and Dr. May fought alongside him, their contributions critical to the team's survival. In the end, it was Kain who delivered the final blow. With a roar of defiance, he charged the Vraxian leader, his weapon flashing in the dim light. The two warriors clashed, their strength and skill evenly matched. But Kain, driven by the unbreakable spirit of humanity, emerged victorious. The Vraxian leader fell, and with him the will of his warriors. The arena fell silent, the echoes of battle fading into the toxic wind. The human team, battered and broken but still standing, had done the impossible. They had outlasted, outmaneuvered, and outfought every other species. They were the last ones standing. As the Galactic Council's ships descended to retrieve the survivors, Kain looked at his team with a mixture of pride and sorrow. They had won, but the cost had been high. Grayson's sacrifice would not be forgotten, nor would the sacrifices of all those who had fought and died to prove humanity's worth. The Counselor Vrax, his expression one of grudging respect, approached Kain. "You have proven yourselves," he said, his voice devoid of its usual mockery. "Humanity has earned its place among the stars." Kain nodded, his eyes hard but filled with determination. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We're not just survivors. We're warriors, and we're here to stay." As the team boarded the Council's ship, the weight of their victory settled over them. They had faced the galaxy's best and emerged victorious. But they also knew that this was only the first chapter in humanity's story. The stars were vast, and the challenges ahead would be greater than anything they had faced before. But they were ready. They were humanity's warriors, and they would not back down.